Hey, what's going on, guys? SnivyPootis here with another video. Now, this is going to be a sort of short list of Final Fantasy XIV beginner stuff that you really might want to know, and this could help you out, might not, but this is usually just for the people who literally don't know anything about the game, so if you're brand new, this will definitely help you out. Anyway, first things first, if you haven't already, if the game has probably prompted you by now, but it will say, oh, you can switch from Legacy or Standard in the settings. I highly recommend that you switch to Legacy movement, because Legacy, well, yeah, it might seem, Legacy, well, why would I want to use the old one? Well, Legacy and Standard, the difference between it is that with Standard, you can't turn around when you press S. So when you press S, when you Legacy, if you press S, your character turns around and you go backwards, and you walk backwards, run backwards, whatever. But with Standard, you just moonwalk. So like the only way for you to move around properly in Standard mode is by pressing A or D, turning on completely, and then pressing W to move in that direction. And while that can work, because the camera movement is not that bad, it's just usually a lot easier just to press S and just instantly go backward, because you don't want to be going moonwalking slowly out of an AoE and then ending up dying. It's usually just better off, because you don't really need to be facing the boss the entire time, especially if you have a reason to be running away or going back and forth in the first place. You're most likely not going to be looking at the boss anyway, so you might as well just have it on Legacy, because the difference is night and day in terms of movement. But obviously it's what you prefer, but most people play with Legacy, and Legacy is usually a lot easier for newer players, so take that as you will. Another thing, if you're playing a melee DPS like Lancer or Pugilist, you might have already noticed that by around level 30, you might see rear and flank positionals. So the difference between that is that with flank positionals, flank means on the side of the boss, and rear obviously means the boss is back at the boss. If you click on most bosses, again, most bosses in the game have a sort of round hitbox. May be huge, might be small, might be round, in between, but they have a little piece of slice in the back of the boss, as in there's a cut where the boss has no the hitbox isn't there, it seems, but that is a part of the hitbox. And that part of the hitbox where nothing is there, that is the rear. That entire section of the circle that is just cut out, that's the rear. And right to the side of that, where the AoE or the hitbox starts again, is the flank. So if you have an attack that does a flank positional, you want to be right next to that cutout. But if you have a rear positional, you want to be right behind the cutout, or at least having your character. The key is to having your character facing the part that you need to hit. So if you need to hit a rear, you need to have your character facing the rear, or having your character's hitbox on the rear when you press the action button, and vice versa for flanks. And third thing, read your tooltips. Now, this may be an obvious one, but really just read your tooltips. It's not that hard. And by read your tooltips, I really mean just go to your abilities and you lock a new ability. You say, I don't know, you're playing White Mage, and then you lock Cure 3. You want to look at it and see how much HP restores. It's say potency. And while potency is something I can really explain in just one video or just one little tip, the higher the number, the better. And while you may see oh, this does a much more than this, so I want to use that, you want to keep in mind that some things are AoE, so they might do less damage, some things might do more damage, and some things are on cooldown and stuff like that. So make sure you read your tooltips so you know what everything does, because if you just sit there trying to mash your buttons and not doing anything, you're going to be doing less things for your team if you don't know what your actual job buttons do. So it's important to read your tooltips. Another thing, make sure that you also are aligning your raid buffs. And this is a bit of more of a complex thing, not so much beginner, but some jobs get their raid buffs at level 50, like Bard and Astrologer. But make sure that later on in the game that you'll have anything that is on a 2-minute cooldown. So I can't really think of anything on top of my head that's super low level. But if it's on a 2-minute cooldown, then you want to make sure that it's along with everyone else's 2-minute cooldown. And that is something that you'll really only see at level 50 for like Astro and like I said, Bard. But later on, it's really important to get a grasp on that. And you want to see if your job has a raid buff. And the easiest way to tell is just to go into your abilities, look at your abilities, and then look at all of them. And if you see one that says increases parties crit by 10%, and then recast time is 120 seconds, that means that's your 2-minute buff. And as soon as you get that, that is your lifeblood. You want to make sure you use it 3rd GCD in the opener, and the whole time you want to pop it up cooldown. And I know opener, it's like, what's an opener? And opener, I'll be getting to that in a second. Opener is something that you don't really need to worry about in the game. People might throw it around and say like, oh, do you know what your opener is? Stuff like that. But when it comes to openers, it's something that's something more advanced, and you don't really need to do it until like level 90. So, but every job has an opener at every level interval. So 50, 60, 70, 80. But you really only need to care about it at level 90. But the general premise is you always want to start with either a precast if you're a caster. So if you're playing Summoner or Arcanist, you want to cast Ruin, and before the boss is actually like active, and then that way it's a little bit extra damage. Or if you're playing like any other job, you want to hit your like 1, aka your first attack in your combo starter. So say you're playing Pugilist, you hit Boot Shine first, and you want to start with Boot Shine, and then you go with Twin Snake, Snap Punch, and then Rinse and Repeat. Because this is given that you're sub level 60 at least. It's like below level 60, I mean, because that's really the threshold where this video wouldn't really matter for you. Next thing on the list. Whenever you're playing tank, it is important, very, very important, that you, first of all, make sure your tank stance is on. Because if your tank stance was on before you went in, but your level changed as you went into the instance, then you're going to have to turn your tank stance back on. Because thing is, when the game the level syncs you, it automatically turns off any like buffs like that. So you want to make sure that if your tank stance was on before the dungeon, and you let's say you're level 50 warrior, and you go into like a level 47 dungeon, you want to turn your tank stance on. You want to make sure it's on anyway, because chances are it's probably off, because again, whenever your level changes, it takes off all your buffs. That's how it works. So double check that your stance is on. And when your stance is on, when you're pulling mobs as a tank, you want to make sure that you hit mobs at least 2 times with your AoE. Because this is assuming that you're doing big pulls. But even if you're not doing big pulls, you should always do 2 AoEs on each mob pack, because that's most guaranteed to have your aggro in between pulling mob packs. Sometimes you might have your aggro ripped away, and that's okay, because sometimes you have a summoner or something like that that's cracked as hell and taking aggro from you. As long as you use your ranged ability, so Tomahawk for Warrior, Dark Mend for Dark Knight, Shield Law for Paladin, or Lightning Shot for Gunbreaker, you want to make sure that you use that on any mobs that, if you see on the party list that a mob has a green or orange marker next to them in the the enemy list, that means that they're not aggroed on you, they're aggroed onto something else. And it's usually like a healer or a range that's doing a bunch of damage in between pulls. So you want to click on that one, and then if you are close enough to it, hit it with your main GCD attacks, like your physical attacks. Or if you're not super close to it, either use Provoke, which is the big yellow button that you get as a tank at level 30, I believe. Or you can use your range attack, like I said before, and that will do just fine. But really depends on what tank you're playing and like what the scenario is, because sometimes you might be able to hold aggro super well, sometimes you might lose it, and that's okay. That's just a part of playing tank. Sometimes you lose aggro between pulls. As long as you regain it at a timely manner, then you're fine. And generally, 1 or 2 mobs aggroed onto someone is not going to get them killed, unless it's like a super high level dungeon and the mobs hit like trucks for some reason. But generally, it's good etiquette to just try and get it off your team as soon as possible, especially as the caster, because if they get hit while they're casting, it's going to interrupt their cast, and you don't want that to happen. But generally, 2 AoEs on every enemy, and then you move on to the next pop. So you pull with your ranged attack, AoE combo, and then move on to the next pack. And then you do that until you either get to the wall or you feel like that, okay, I can't pull anymore. And also, going back on that, make sure you pull what you're comfortable with, okay? Because I see a lot of tanks that try to, you know, big dick pull with like massive pulls and just trying their best to get all the fucking mobs in, and then they end up dying because they don't know how to properly big pull. And while it may seem like it's easy, like, oh, I'm just gonna pull everything and mash all my defenses and then boom, I'm done. Big pulling as a tank is something that you kind of have to learn, because there's a tank difference between every tank, because like every tank is, you know, for some reason every tank is like not as good as tanking as the other. Like for example, Dark Knight in dungeons is absolutely horrible, but Warrior in any dungeon is absolutely awesome, unless you don't have raw intuition or bloodletting, which is, you know, the kind of the whole reason why it's good in dungeons. But if you are playing a tank that isn't as good at pulling mobs and, you know, sitting themselves in a mob pack, then you might want to be a bit more cautious, especially depending on what type of healer that you have and how good the healer is. Because, you know, you could be like the worst Dark Knight in the world and you don't know what you're doing at all. But if your white mage is super cracked at their job, then, you know, you won't have to worry about it. But if you're playing, you know, Gunbreaker and your Scholar is like new to Scholar, then you might want to try and chill on the pulls. Generally, if your healer's new and you want to, if you're comfortable with it, you can ask them, hey, I'm gonna big pull. Is that all right with you? And if they say cool, go for it, and then you do it. But if they say, can we try and pull a bit smaller, then you do that. Obviously, most people just big pull anyway. Most tanks will just big pull automatically. You'll see even like low level tanks. But it's never a bad idea to ask if you're not sure. And flipping the scale here, if you're a new healer and you're with the tank and you're new to healing and you want to get ease into it, it is okay to ask the tank, hey, can we not pull too big because I'm new to healer and I don't want to drop you. That's fine. Do not feel afraid to ask for leeway in between pulls, because it may seem silly at first, but it's how people get used to playing their job, because you don't want to get thrust into a dungeon with the tank that's pulling half the dungeon, each room, and then you don't know what you're doing, because you don't want to have a tank, you don't want to have a healer that doesn't know what they're doing trying to heal you against 10 plus enemies hitting you at once. That's not gonna go well for you, I promise. But when it comes to healing in general, basically as long as your tank is not dying or your party is not dying, then you should be doing damage. That is the biggest misconception I've ever seen, is that when you're healing, you want to make sure you're doing damage. You want to make sure you're doing damage. You hear me? You hear me right now? You want to make sure you're doing damage, because if you're not doing damage as a healer, then you're probably not doing anything else, and that's not good. You want to make sure you're always doing damage. If there's no one's taking any damage and everyone's full HP, then you keep spamming your damage button, and you only have one on most healers. You might have one or two extra ones depending on what healer you're playing, but most healers only have one damage button and an OGCD that does damage and stuff like that. But general premise is that you always want to be doing damage as a healer, no matter what. Unless your party is absolutely needing healing right then and there, you want to be making sure you press your damage button as much as possible, because you might be thinking oh, I'm a healer, my damage doesn't matter, I should leave the damage to the people who, that's their job to do damage. No, healing is nice, yes, but when you're playing a damage, when you're playing a healer, damage is your damage is just as important as everyone else's. Same with a tank. Tank damage and healer damage means a lot more to the party than people think it is. If only the damage people were doing damage and the tanks and healers were just sitting around to wait to do their jobs, then the dungeons and bosses would take forever. So make sure that you're always consistently doing as much damage as you possibly can. Otherwise, if the party is dying or something like that, make sure you heal them up, obviously. And if you're a DPS player, make sure you also try and be nice and don't stand intimidated, please, for your healer's sake. But really, the general thing with DPS, it really varies from each job, obviously, because I can't tell you. But the general premise is just to make sure that you are keeping in mind your healer's resources, because you don't want to be standing in like 4 AoEs and having like 5 bone stacks and your healer's trying to keep you alive in between AoEs that almost one-shot you. You know, you want to try your best to learn the fight, and if you need to, look at a guide. You know, there's nothing wrong with looking at a guide on a fight or a boss or a dungeon prior to doing it, because that way, you know, you're more knowledgeable on said content going into it, and you're not, you know, jeopardizing the rest of the team by doing so. So make sure, if you have to go into a YouTube video and look at stuff if you need to, like maybe like this one. But probably not exactly like this one, because I don't make those type of guides, not yet anyway. But one last thing that I know that most people probably aren't going to be listening out for or looking out for is that play with friends. Now this might seem like the obvious one, big obvious one, but really playing this game with friends is going to enhance your experience so much more than you might think. Because sitting here, like right now, I can tell you that playing it with people that I know made this game much more enjoyable for me to get through. So if you can, try and drag some people who are fan of MMOs or fans of Final Fantasy, or just, you know, people who want a new game to play. Drag them on, say, hey, it's a free trial, we can no harm, no foul. I mean, obviously you can't make a party if you have a free trial, I should mention that. But regardless, you can still find someone to make a party for you, because people do that all the time for free trial people. But it is really just not super hard to find more people to play it with, unless you know, like even if you don't know people right off the top of your head, you can always just be like, hey, I'm gonna go to, you know, my friend's Discord server, or just find people that, or, you know, just chat up people in the quicksands or the comments, whatever. But really, playing this game with friends is going to enhance your experience much more, because you're going to be playing with people that you love, and, you know, you're going to feel more secure when you fuck up, and you're going to feel even better when you get through the hard stuff. Like, this is going off of the beginner, but like, if you play with friends, you're going to have a lot more fun than without. So if you can, pick up a buddy or two, maybe a whole 4 stack, and just go in and have some fun. Anyway, this video is a lot longer than I thought it'd be, but hopefully some of these help to y'all. If not, then let me know in the comments below how much of a doofus I am for talking about all this for 18 minutes straight. Anyway, that's been enough from me. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace out.